Chris Philp.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It gives me some pleasure to follow the Shadow Secretary of State for Education. Let me start by welcoming this budget and congratulating the Secretary of State on her speech a few moments ago. I'm delighted that she managed to secure protection for the school's budget, which will continue to grow in real terms. I congratulate the Chief Secretary, who I see is in his place for facilitating that. I would also like to welcome the national funding formula, which the Secretary of State has been working on with a forensic attention to detail. It will ensure that funding follows need rather than a historic accident of postcode. And in Croydon, the borough which I represent, which has been historically underfunded, we will see that historic injustice corrected. So I would like to congratulate the Secretary of State for her work and welcome the national funding formula. Now, the Shadow Secretary of State for Education, in her speech she read out a few minutes ago, gave us a blizzard of statistics. What I wanted to intervene to say was the most important statistic that we have in this country when it comes to education is that 1.8 million more children today are being educated in good or outstanding schools compared to 2010. So the member opposite, the Honourable Lady opposite, can quote all the sums she likes, but the fact remains this government is delivering a better education for more children than ever before, and members on this side of the House are proud that our government are doing that. 1.8 million more children in good and outstanding schools. That is the result of the Free School and Academy programme, and I am delighted that this government is continuing and expanding that programme. And in that vein, I'm also pleased that the Chief Secretary, the Chancellor and the Education Secretary have found over the next 5 years, so up until 2021-22, an additional 1.035 billion to fund further new schools, because new schools give choice to parents and, as those statistics I just quoted show, encourage higher standards. Now, some of those schools may well be new grammar schools, which the Honourable Lady opposite criticised. Now, I should declare to the House I'm a grammar school boy. I went to a grammar school in South London. And I know from my own experience that grammar schools help children from ordinary backgrounds fulfil their potential. All the studies show that all children from ordinary backgrounds who go to grammar schools do a great deal better than those who go to other schools. Yes.
I'm sorry the Honourable Lady opposite didn't give way, because she did give way to the Honourable Jennifer Bassett law, many of whose constituents attend a grammar school in my constituency. The question she failed to answer is this: why, since the abolition of grammar schools, has there been a catastrophic fall in social mobility in the most deprived areas?
Well, I think my honourable friend raises a very important point. Grammar schools can and should be an engine for social mobility. But I think what is interesting about the government's white paper and the proposals the Education Secretary is bringing forward is that they include new measures to make sure grammar schools take on board a higher proportion of pupils on free school meals. And there is a very successful case study for this. King Edward VI grammar schools in Birmingham have taken a number of steps which include outreach to local primary schools in deprived areas, free tuition for the tests, and bursaries to fund things like school uniform and travel, which have together increased those grammar schools' free school meal intake from 3%, which is very low, up to about 22%, which goes to show the measures the Education Secretary is proposing do actually work in practice, and I strongly welcome them. I happily give way.
I do thank him. In the interests of joined-up thinking, what proportion of qualifications will these new grammar schools give over to T-levels?
Thank you. Well, look, I think it's up to individual schools to set their own individual curricula and offer their children and their pupils choices. That is what localism means. But of course, grammar schools, by their nature, tend to be more academic in flavour. Well, I mean, that's what a grammar school is. It should hardly be a surprise to members opposite. And there are other kinds of school. There are other kinds of school which have a more technical specialisation. diversity of provision, choice for parents, and variety in our system are signs of success, and members on this side of the House celebrate that. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to turn now to some other measures in the budget.
Your front bench wouldn't.
Starting with business rates, because I know a number of members were concerned, including me, about the effect of the business rates revaluation on smaller businesses, and a town called Purley in my constituency was particularly affected by some quite significant upward revaluations. So in that context, I think it's very welcome that the budget announced £435 million of discretionary relief to help small businesses in towns like Purley. But I would like to suggest that it may be worth reconsidering the profiling of that £435 million over time, and I direct these comments particularly to the Chief Secretary. The lion's share of that money comes in the first 2 years, £180 million in 2017-18, £85 million in 2018-19. Now, that is very welcome, but the transitional reliefs, the upward caps on small business rate increases in 17-18 are 5% and 7.5% in 18-19, meaning that most small businesses won't really feel too much of an effect in the next 2 years. It's really 3 years, 4 years and 5 years' time that these increases will be most powerfully felt. So I wonder if the Chief Secretary might consider changing the profile of that money, so rather than front-loading it in the next 1 or 2 years, it might be backloaded into sort of year 3 and year 4 of the period, when the effects of business rate increases will be most heavily felt. So the total amount of money would remain the same, £435 million, but the profile over time would be shifted to better match the effect of the business rates increases. A second thought which I would offer for the future on the transitional relief again relates to these upward and downward caps. So I think for the next financial year, 17-18, bills have been sent out. There is an upward cap of 5% for small businesses, so no small business gets an increase of more than 5%. There is a downward cap for large businesses of 4.1%, so no large business gets a decrease greater than 4.1%. And I accept that is now fixed. But looking into the future, into 2019, 2021, I wonder if in the autumn statement we might consider fine-tuning those upward and downward caps such that the largest businesses, such as Big Four supermarkets, have a lower or even a zero further downward cap. That is to say, they don't get any further decreases beyond the decrease next year, and that would fund a more generous upward cap for the smallest businesses. So rather than getting an upward cap of 10 to 15% in 2019 to 2021, the money saved might be used to lower those caps. So it would be fiscally neutral. It wouldn't affect the coming financial year, which I accept is fully set in stone already, but it would just help some of those small businesses in 3 or 4 years' time, including businesses in Purley in my constituency, because I've noticed the cumulative upward cap for these small businesses over the 5-year period accumulates to 64.2%, which is quite a high upward cap, and if we can find a way of softening that blow, I think it would be very welcome indeed. Another area which the Chancellor touched on in his budget statement related to pollution, and he indicated that, particularly from diesel cars, and as a London MP, this obviously affects my constituency and all London constituencies particularly profoundly. The Chancellor mentioned there would be a plan delivered over the summer responding to the European Union court case, and that fiscal measures would be introduced in the autumn budget. I must say I have very significant reservations about Sadiq Khan's proposed diesel scrappage scheme, which would cost in London £515 million over 2 years. Were one to do that nationally, the cost would be £3.5 billion per year over 2 years, which I think is unaffordable and in fact would simply cause one set of diesel cars to be replaced by another. So I don't support the diesel scrappage scheme proposed by the Mayor of London. However, one fiscal measure the government might consider, bearing in mind diesel cars now burn 10 million tonnes of fuel a year. That's a 3 times increase over the last 10 years. The government might consider introducing a significantly increased registration tax for new diesel cars. I say cars, not vans or lorries, which I accept have an impact on business, in order to deter people from buying new diesel cars, which now make up about half of all new car purchases in this country. If we did that, it would obviously have no effect retrospectively on people who have bought a diesel car already, but it would encourage people to switch away from diesel cars in the future, and I think would greatly help ease pollution problems in cities like London in the months and years ahead. Madam Deputy Speaker, I can see the time limit is rapidly approaching, so let me conclude. I'm glad I've said something that's popular on the benches opposite. So let me conclude by welcoming this budget, which continues the government's record of job creation and growth. And let me again congratulate the Education Secretary and the Chief Secretary for protecting and growing education funding and committing to fund more excellent schools in our country.
George Caravan.